and I want to welcome you to our CalPro Administrative Forum webinar series. I'm going to give you another 30 seconds or so to complete the survey, and then I'm going to change the screen to our welcome screen. Were created with the goal of being able to provide adult education administrators with the opportunity to engage with their peers on topics that could help them in the development, management, and sustainability of their adult education programs. And with that in mind, you will find the topics that we have in our webinar series for administrators very timely and very useful in your daily activities at your school. Today's webinar is being presented by two of our PD partners, our professional development partners. Last year, or earlier this year in April, CalPro sought nominations for professional development partners who would attend the COABE and CCAE National Adult Education Conference on behalf of CalPro to make sure that we had coverage throughout the conference so that we could find a way to successfully gather information, research, policy, and practice and resources, and then share it back with the field through the efforts of the PD partners. And 10 PD partners were selected and identified, and one of their responsibilities for their ability to attend the conference is to prepare webinars and articles that you might see in CalProgress to share with the field. As I mentioned at the beginning of this session, our topic today is implementing program changes to meet adult learner needs for the 21st century workforce. And we are very, very fortunate to have with us two co-presenters, Kelly Keith and Lynn Nicodemus. Kelly Keith is the Associate Dean of Adult Basic Skills at Mount Hood Community College in Oregon, and she is formerly a teacher on special assignment from Oakland Adult and Career Education. And Lynn Nicodemus is the Vice Principal at Pittsburgh Adult Education Center. And they are both experts in this area and have spent a lot of time with theory and practice, as you will see throughout the session this morning or this afternoon. In this session, you will learn about the characteristics of the current global economy and their implications for adult education. You will also learn about 4 policies that will guide adult education agencies to meet these challenges as we prepare our learners for the global economy. And you will learn about a pilot project at the Oakland Adult School that demonstrates how they implemented these policies. Following the presentation today, which has been extended to a 90-minute session as a reminder, following the session today, you will have an opportunity at the end for some questions and answers as well as discussion opportunities. Lastly, please know that if you are interested in a certificate for attending this session, we can provide that for you as well. If you just email me at the end of the session at cmoore@air.org, we will be happy to get you a certificate of attendance for participating in today's webinar. And again, the webinar today has been extended with the dual presentation to a 90-minute webinar, not the hour. And with that, I want to welcome our two presenters, and I will turn over the presentation to them. I will turn over now to Lynn and Kelly, and they will begin.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lynn Nicodemus, and I'm a vice principal at Pittsburgh Adult, which is in East Contra Costa County, part of the Bay Area. And I want to say thanks to Barbara Crawford for her technical support and help in setting up the webinar, and to Cherise for her support and training Kelly and I in presenting on a webinar. I want to mention that at the end of the presentation, there'll be a number of documents related to this presentation, including the PowerPoint that you could download at that time. The California Strategic Plan has been developed and is in its final stages of being approved, and we're preparing to have it implemented in California. Many of us have been in adult education for many years. I've been in a practitioner, an instructor, and now an administrator for over 20. And it can be difficult to see and do things in a different way when we've been practicing in a certain way for so long. So we all work together and share and listen to each other, and that is what I envision as our purpose for gathering on this webinar today, to support each other in creating adult education programs that meet our learners' needs in the 21st century. As you logged on to the webinar, you had the opportunity to answer some survey questions. And I'm putting those back up again, and if you haven't had a chance to answer them, you could do that quickly while I'm introducing this activity. There were two purposes to this survey. One of them was to get a sense of where the participants in the survey are at in their change process. And the second reason was to give you a chance to reflect on some of the key points of this webinar, to personalize it to your experience and your situation. So let's get a look at these questions and see how the participants have answered them. Number one, survey question number one, staff in my school are aware of our school's role in preparing students to succeed in this global economy. So we see that 41% agreed, another 41% say they're working toward that goal, and 3 of us need to examine this further at our schools. In my school, have a clear picture of what our students need to be competitive in today's job market. And so 5 of us agreed, 7 of us are working toward that goal, and 5 need to look at this more. Survey question number 3, my school provides research-based staff development so that instructors can effectively lead students in this global economy. And 4 of us agree, 8 are working toward that goal, and 3 need to look at this area more closely. Survey question number 4, instructors at my school know how to develop contextualized curriculum. 1 agrees, 10 are working toward that goal, and 6 need to examine this area further. And survey question number 5, students in all academic and workforce-related programs at my school acquire technology skills needed for future jobs. 3 agree, 11 are working toward that goal, and 3 need to examine this further. Survey question number 6, students in my school's academic and workforce programs develop written plans to guide them in, and no one agrees, and 9 of us are working toward that goal, and 8 need to look at this further. And the final question, survey 7, basic reading, writing, and math skills are integrated into all academic and workforce programs in my school. 7 agree, 6 working toward that goal, and 4 need to examine this further. So just as an overall, I think we can see from this group of people in this workshop that we're all in a process. We're nobody's reached perfection at this point, or reached all of these standards, and that we're all in the process of looking at them, working toward it, and eventually being able to accomplish that. So thanks for your responses, and I hope this reflection was useful to you. In the next slide, you're going to be able to look at the objectives that Charisse shared with us. At the beginning. And the third is that Kelly and her guest presenters will share on. And it's a case study in implementing the policies that I'm going to share about. Goals and programs. The first force is that everything is connected. You may be familiar with the phrase 6 degrees of separation, which came from some research in the 60s, and it refers to research data indicating that we're connected to any other person in the United States by no more than 5 other people. And just last week, I read a New York Times article on new research done on this using Facebook. And this is looking at Facebook connections worldwide. And it indicated that we now are only 4.74 degrees have only 4.74 degrees of separation, and that's worldwide. And we're becoming more connected with everyone. This shrinking degree of connection has a very important message for adult education. And that implication is that we must be a cohesive, articulated, productive part of the educational and workforce systems. If we're not tightly connected, we're going to be seen as obsolete, and funding will go to other agencies, and probably use this phrase, adult education is the best kept secret in education. We need to change this, and we need to make absolutely sure that this can no longer survive and thrive in the 21st century. Is that work gets done anytime and any place. And here we see a picture of a man using his computer and getting some work done on the beach, and another picture of a woman doing yoga with an online instructor. And think of us today. I'm here in my office in Pittsburgh. Kelly's up in Oregon. We have people on this office, hotels, and who knows what other types of location some of us may be at. We can be on laptops, desktop computers, iPads, or mobile phones. So right here in this moment, we are a living demonstration of this reality that work gets done anytime and any place. One implication of this for our adult education programs is that we must educate our students to be responsible, flexible, and independent. Many of them will not be working in a traditional workplace directly overseen by a boss. A question for you for your reflection is, how do we structure an educational environment that will prepare students for this type of work world? Okay, could you advance to the next slide that says labor is a global commodity. And there's labor is a global commodity. And you can see in this little cartoon here is a young man who has what looks like a traditional type of lemonade stand. Probably most of us did something like this when we were kids at one time or another. But he has a different spin on it. He says, I no longer sell lemonade. I'm a franchise outlet for a multinational. So he's got the big picture. Labor is a global commodity, and we're all part of that commodity. The implication for adult education is that adults in the USA are in competition with workers around the world. And if our students' knowledge and skills are not competitive, they're going to struggle to succeed against this work pool. Another thing for us to reflect about is what messages that we need to give to our students. What worldviews do we need to integrate? What kind of cultural understanding do we need to share in our educational programs to prepare our students to understand that they are a part of their state. They are competing worldwide for jobs. Okay, please advance the next slide. The fourth global economic force that we're dealing with is that no one can accomplish anything alone. To get our work done, we must become a part of a team. An implication for our adult education students is that they must learn how to work effectively with others, both face-to-face and through electronic connections, such as this kind of webinar that we're working with, phones, email. They're going to have a different kind of work world in the sense of how they're connecting to their fellow workers. Can they be a team not only with the people that they're working with in person, but can they work effectively as a team with people who are in other remote locations? A reflection question. What does an educational program look like that gives students these kinds of team experiences? The fifth global economic force that is impacting adult education is that job occupations have polarized. Here are two pictures. One, you see men doing some kind of road or construction worker, and then on the left is a man working in a lab. Tier 1 jobs, which are high skill, high wage, and Tier 3, which are low skill, low wage jobs, are on the rise. But due to offshoring and automation, the Tier 2 jobs, which require a high school diploma and some post-secondary or education or technical training, those jobs are declining. The implication is that we need to provide a strong foundational skills for our students to continue to reach their initial work objectives. We need to help them envision the need to continually upgrade their skills even after they have gotten their jobs, and maybe even what they consider their ideal dream jobs. To present the final global economic forces, I'm going to share them with you and give you the chance to brainstorm the implications for our programs. Now you see these boxes appearing on here, and in the instruction box it says, please share your thoughts on how these economic forces impact adult education, specifically at the program, classroom, curriculum, or student support level. And some of different ones of some of you may be able to read the whole title. initial box that tells what the whole title is for your box. So looking at box number 1, you see it says A through I. So the people whose first names on this webinar who begin with the letters A through I, it was unusual, but out of the 30 people who registered for this webinar, 8 of them had their names started with the letter J. So the letter J people get a box all to themselves. And number 3 is for people whose first names start with K through L, number 4, M through O, and box 5, R through Z. So for example, a box it is whose first name starts with A through L, for example, you might type in, we need to have computer training in all of our classes. And then number 2, people whose first name starts with J, routine tasks are automated and work becomes more complex. So you might type in there that we need to develop higher level thinking skills. Okay, so I think we're going to have about 1 to 1.5 minutes for you to type in your chat box. Okay, I see a couple of chat boxes that are up. We got box, anyone from box 1? We need some people from the A through I people. And how about box 4, M through Q? All work. Some of the ideas of types of technology used need to be shared for different jobs. Very good. Students will need basic computer skills in a wide variety of jobs. Technology is changing all the work. The key is to keep up with the technology that's constantly changing. Oh boy, and I just got an iPad too, and I'm learning how to operate that, and that is so true. And you hardly get one little program mastered, and here comes the next version of it. Diana Batista, specific job training programs need to integrate that technology and provide current relevant training. We must start by helping our students get comfortable at the computer. In addition, make technology more of our focus in regards to students accessing information. I think that's really valuable to focus on the fact of students feeling comfortable. And perhaps we've experienced it as we have gotten used to some new technology. I'm just learning to do the Moodle, and I know the kinds of feelings and almost this frozen sense that I have when I encounter this new technology and have to start operating it. And getting comfortable with that level of continually upgrading our skills and learning new things, that's very, very important. And we have use of handheld, clouds, Prezi, etc. need to be introduced and financed, loaned, etc. That's so true. And some of those things I don't even know what a Prezi is. And so we've got to learn about what they are. Adult Ed can partner with local businesses to have input into what's needed and use and introduce the same technology and terms as the K-12 uses. Yes, and that helps us to work better with them. And in box number 2 with all the J's, routine tasks are automated and work becomes more complex. We need to teach problem-solving skills and approaches. Yes. If people can't look at what's being done and figure out for themselves how to fix it or improve or deal with it, they're not going to be able to be effective. As work becomes more complex, we need to also include skills to balance complex work with less complex tasks to avoid burnout. Very good. Teachers must keep up to date on technology available for learning and teaching students. Yes, and we're going to talk a little bit more later about the whole teacher training issue. And Jay says situational awareness requires more involved language and numeracy skills than following an established routine. Very good point. Box 3. Information is accessible to everyone, and yes, it's available in a lot of different formats. Written, verbal, pictures, yes. Learning all of that is very important. Even at the literacy level, students need to be exposed to computers, at least keyboarding. Instructors who are hesitant to introduce students who are just learning English need to have support to make that possible. And Kelly says that this idea impacts our instruction and how we offer it and what we offer. Prominent languages in the community are addressed as well. And the teacher can no longer be the expert. You can't know everything. What you have to do is you have to know where to go to find it. Students need to be able to use the internet to do research and locate places in their communities. If they don't have an answer, they need to know how to find it. Yes. A lot of information is now only accessible online, which makes it hard for those students who don't have access to a computer. So how that we help them get that access is important. And in the M through Q box, number 4, skills to accomplish traditional jobs are upgraded. We need to upgrade our programs. For example, for office jobs, we need to be teaching the most recent word processing. For our academics, we need to be sure our classes align with the colleges and our students are prepared to enter college. And we need to partner with the workforces in our community. And each and every year, I'm required to learn new tech skills to do my job. Yes? And maybe typing should be one of them. Yes. And in the final box, service and knowledge transactions dominate. Believe it or not, I believe soft skills are even more important in a global and technological economy. It is. It's increasingly. And different kinds of customer skills. Customer skills, you know, across a computer, using, say, email or whatever you may be using, or Skype, are going to be different than customer skills in person. Agreed, especially since very few people will stay in the same job or even occupation for a lifetime. Skills require people, skills and knowledge, facility with specific techniques. And agreed, there has to be a balance between technology. And if you've ever done tech support over the phone, I think that is so true. Soft that I have learned, 80% of business owners say that what helps a student ultimately to succeed in their job, 80% say that soft skills are the most important. Keeping current, lifelong learning will be a key to staying relevant, and I think there needs to be a focus on basic communication, grammar, and spelling. And we're so tolerant factor in the growth of international communication in a global marketplace and learn the culture and customs of our customers around the world. Thank you all for those ideas, and I hope they've sparked some thoughts for you. We're now returning to the main PowerPoint, and we should be on Policy 1. If I'll see if I'm going to get control back or not of this. Dr. Baness suggested 4 policies that will focus our agencies so that we meet these global challenges. A reflection question before I begin that are, do you have guiding policies that are clearly articulated and shared and used by all of your staff in planning? If you don't have these kinds of policies, you may want to consider using some of these policies in some way in what you share. If your staff does not have a sense that that there's policies in place that that will guide them, they won't be unified. Okay, I finally got control back here. Hooray. So policy 1. To deal with the complex education our students must acquire, it is essential to integrate technical skills and use of information technology along with generalized learning. And this isn't saying that they're add-ons. This is saying they're integrated. And Kelly's case study is going to demonstrate the process one school followed to achieve this integration. And here's a little cartoon about a young man who has the opposite problem of what our students, many of our students have. He's looking at the blackboard and the teacher says to him, there aren't any icons to click. It's a chalkboard. And this may be the reality of the future. Policy 2. Teacher education must become a larger part of our programs. We must shift more resources to ensure that our teachers have the knowledge and skills to provide contextualized education and possess knowledge of the needs of the global economy so that they can equip our students. No longer can a career tech teacher say, I don't need to know how to teach reading. No longer can an ESL teacher say, I'm not a computer teacher. The culture of adult education teachers needs to include a wide-ranging knowledge for teachers in all programs. They need to know about other adult education programs. They need to know about college transition. They need to know about technology. They need to know how to teach math and reading. They need to know what job skills are needed for the students, the jobs their students are pursuing, and they need to know what kinds of jobs are out there in the world. The adult education teacher of the 21st century needs to be deeper and wider. Policy 3. Adult education agencies need to utilize entrepreneurial thinking and behaviors as is a process of asking questions. What are problems and challenges that are being faced by my students and organization? What do we need to do to address them? How can we effectively market our products and services? And explore careers for new groups of people like the baby boomers who are looking for new jobs in their retirement. Kelly's case study is going to demonstrate how one school rethought and reconstructed their ESL program using an entrepreneurial, research-based approach. Policy 4. Educators must cross boundaries and turn stakeholders into partners. We need to develop rapport and relationships first, practice positive regard, listen and integrate partners' interests, and find ways that partners can contribute resources and frame solutions differently for different partners. We need to seek out and woo partners, and this means a long-term effort. Sometimes they just don't respond initially. We've got to go out there and make partners with student support services, career pathways, post-secondary education, internships, jobs, and others. And Kelly's case study demonstrates how one school helped break down the program silos to unite staff from different programs within their school to become true partners. And a final slide for my part of the presentation is a quote from Cheryl Keenan, the director of OVE, who also spoke at the conference. And she shared with us that national leaders see the role of adult education as being that to support economic recovery. In 1973, 70% of the workforce had a high school diploma or less. In 2017, all well-paying jobs require some post-secondary. We're looking at a different world. And Cheryl Keenan said, the role for adult education in the 21st century is to support economic recovery in this global economy. A key part of demonstrating benefits to the economy is tied to preparing and transitioning adult education students to post-secondary education through articulated pathways and student support services. So now I'll be turning this presentation over to Kelly Keith, but keep in mind these economic forces and policies as she shares her case study. Over to you, Kelly.
Thank you, Lynn, for laying a foundation for the case study, or what we refer to as our pilot project that Oakland Adult and Career Education began and implemented about 2 years ago now. As I go through this, I might skip through a few slides because I want to respect the remaining time that we have and leave time for questions if there should be some from the participants. But the slides are there in case you, so the slides are there in case you want to download it and look through it. And it basically just outlines my article. When we began planning for this pilot project, we really had to wrestle and really become engaged with the concepts and policies that Lynn just discussed. And one of the questions that we kept coming back to as we planned was, if we are going to integrate 21st century skills and contextualized curriculum and begin a process of bridging our ESL students, what would that look like from a student perspective, and what would that look like from an instructor's perspective, and also what would that look like from a program planning perspective? And for us, as it really began to take shape, it looked very different from anything that we've ever done. So with that, I would like to introduce two of our panelists today. I want to introduce Leslie Mladenich, who is currently a project leader, an EL Civics project leader at Mount Diablo Adult Education, which is in Concord, California, and also a part of the Bay Area. And Leslie was formerly an instructor, and much more actually, an instructor at Oakland Adult and Career Education before Oakland, as we all know, has been placed on pause. And Lisa Salone Palmer is also an instructor, and she works at Berkeley Adult School, which is also located in the Bay Area. And then I currently work in Portland, Oregon, or just outside of Portland, Oregon, at Mount Hood Community College. But I was formerly a teacher on special assignment that coordinated the ESL program. I'm going to sort of go over this next slide. I'm going to talk maybe just briefly about what happened. So Jacques Lacour, who is currently the director of CalPro, was at the time he was the assistant director for Oakland Adult and Career Education, and to begin shifting our program to a model where our students were transitioning from one program to another, or transitioning from ESL or ABE into some of our career technical education courses. He began by pulling us all together in a summer pilot, or a summer project, where he brought all of the teachers and administrators from all of the program areas together to study the best practice, and as a result to have a list of recommendations from which to work to guide our program in this new direction. I want to let you know that actually you can find his article. He wrote an article for CalPro about it, and it's in the spring. It's the spring 2010 article. So you can go to the CalPro website and read about how he did this. But the outcomes from the perspective of a participant was that it really empowered our staff, and it empowered our staff because suddenly we knew what our other programs were doing. We knew what CTE was doing. We knew what our older adults program was doing. We knew what our they learned about the ESL program and ABE and the high school program, and so we just sort of knew who our colleagues were, what they did, how they did it, and the population that they served, which gave us kind of a strength, I think, as we left that institute, as we began working on the next leg of the project. Another outcome of the institute was that there was this great shared decision making. As we researched and took the time to examine best practices, we pulled from those best practices to create we pulled what would work for our agency to create something that would help us, well, it would help us transition or help us start transitioning our program to this new model. And so having all the instructors there as a part of the decision-making process, it just empowered them. So there was authorship and ownership. We got together and we worked in work groups to determine the different things that we were going to bring into our programs, the different ideas that we wanted to see, and then also we had a much deeper knowledge of best practices. There was definitely a shift away from the silos. We developed, as I was just kind of saying, we developed interdepartmental work groups that worked toward this new shared vision. And an example of what I mean by this work group, sort of like a PLC, but it wasn't the traditional PLC. It was a group of people who came together from different departments, so around a certain thing that we wanted to see implemented into the agency. So an example of that would be, we had one work group that was focused on individualized learning plans for our students and how they would look and what would be on them and what kind of information, and you know, would it be an online document? Would it be in a database where all program areas could access it if students were shifting between, you know, ESL and GED or ESL and CTE? Where would this go? So we had this group that was working on this idea, how it would look. And then another outcome was that we had a list of recommendations from all of the teachers and administrators who participated, which was the foundation with which the foundation that we used to begin our work that was organized around transitioning students. So I'm going to kind of skip over this part, and I want to talk a little bit more about what I consider to be the magic of the program or of the pilot that we did. Oops, sorry. So as I said, as we started looking at what a contextualized curriculum would be for our students, and as we started doing that, the pilot itself and the courses that we offered was a completely different structure than we'd ever had before. And so one of the things that was really critical was the term length. We were no longer operating on a 15-week term or a 12-week term or an 18-week. That was no longer the issue. It was 2 9-week sessions. That was the pilot. We decided 9 weeks, we would have to make 9 weeks work somehow. So we had 2 9-week sessions. We had and the 9-week sessions had 10 hours a week. So that was 90 hours total. So if a student took one class, they had 10 hours a week, and after 9 weeks, that was 90 hours total for one class. Another component of this pilot was that we had a 1-week orientation class prior to each session start. So in total, the students were in class for 10 weeks. So they were required to attend this orientation for each day of that week. Class time, we moved from 3 hours and in some cases 4-hour morning classes to 2 hours. So we had 8:30 to 10:30, 10:30 to 12:30, and 1 to 3. And our course offerings were also very well coordinated. So we had students taking a basic computer course from 8:30 in the morning to 10:30 in the morning. And they could also take they could take academic writing, which kind of coordinated with using computers because, as Leslie will probably talk about, she used computers in her instruction, and she coordinated with Lisa. And another really interesting thing that came out of this was that since Lisa and Leslie were sharing students, and their classrooms were right next to each other, it was very, very easy for them to coordinate and discuss student issues and rethink their plan for the day based on just based on being next to each other and sharing the same students. So that was really good and worked well. So a student could take the computer course in the morning, and then after that they could take the academic writing course. And also the students could take up to 3 classes. Since we had an 8:30 to 10:30 and a 10:30 to 12:30 and 1 to 3, they could take 3 coordinated classes that work together. And likewise, the terms were coordinated. So maybe in term 1 we offered beginning computers for ESL students, but in term 2 we offered a more, I guess it was more of an advanced computer class that helped bridge students into our office occupations classes that we offered in our CTE program, which was the goal. We also had ongoing professional development. It wasn't something that happened outside of their work day. It was a part of their schedule. They met at a certain time once a week and really worked a lot on the curriculum and the planning, and they'll both talk about that a little bit later on. But professional development, we shifted our resources. It was really important that the teachers have the time within their work schedule to do that very important work. And then curriculum development. Before we actually started the class, we pulled both Lisa and Leslie, in most cases, out of their current assigned teaching schedule. And instead of having them teach, we had them working on the curriculum that they were going to use in the following term. And again, and in some cases we did pay them extra time, but really it was more, this is just how we were going to do business from now on. We didn't have all this extra money around to give them, additional professional development. It really had to work within their schedule. So it was release time and then a little bit of additional paid time whenever it was really necessary. So let me go to the next slide. So course and student criteria was a really big and important part of this pilot. Because we placed a high value on the class, we decided it was really important to have course and student criteria. We recruited from within our agency across Oakland, so in East Oakland, Central Oakland, and Downtown Oakland. We recruited students from within who had an interest in the courses that we were promoting, and had a beginning high reading score on the CASAS. We made it very clear when we met with students, when we were doing the recruitment piece, we made it very clear to them that attendance was going to be a very important part of this particular class or slate of classes that they were going to take, and that they had to most definitely attend every single day of the 1-week orientation. So for us, that equated to higher quality, and as a result, there were much higher outcomes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about contextualized curriculum and how basically what I was charged with. So, well, one of the many things I was charged with was ensuring that the curriculum was contextualized. And the first thing I want to talk a little bit about is explicit instruction that's balanced with implicit instruction and constructing meaning. I think over the past maybe 20 years, I think we have grown we have grown so far into implicit instruction and having students construct their own meaning. And now with these newer generations coming in, we really have to be careful because they're going to expect things to be a little more clearly laid out for them. And so it's very important to balance the implicit and constructing meaning with very explicit kinds of tools or scaffolds to help the students through the process. And so one of the ways that one of the things I was thinking when we did this was it was really important for us to pull out and identify learning strategies in whatever we were teaching, whether it was teaching reading and writing, listening or speaking, actually pulling out the strategies so that you could give students something to lean on, and so they would know very clearly what was expected of them. So for ESL, we tend to do this at higher levels in reading, but we can and should be doing this in listening and speaking as well. And we show, and so another example would be we would show students exactly what we want them to say in a discussion group. Maybe write it on the board, maybe have a laminated card that the students have with them at all times, and when they're ready to get rid of the card because they've internalized the structure or the sentence frame, then they can get rid of the card, but just making sure that those supports or those scaffolds are there for their success. And then the next part is modeling of 21st century skills in class, which I think this is the wave of the future as the paradigm is now shifting over to a different style of instruction. It is really important that 21st century skills are modeled in class as much as possible. So one of the things is collaboration, and I think this isn't a large jump for us. We do see group work in class. We do see pair work. So we do see that in class. But it's very important to make that more explicit. So no longer can the teacher be, the sage on the stage. They really have to step away and be the guide on the side, helping students get through their tasks or their projects as they move through the class. Situational communication for ESL, but I think this would also fit with ABE students as well, is that we use different registers and they need someone to actually point that out. So an example, so what I mean by that is you want to actually highlight, this is how you would interact, or this is what you would say to your boss at your job. And this is how you would say it to me. How you say it to your friend or your family and how you talk with your friend and family is very different. So really just making an effort to point out as you're going through instruction or making sure that it's part of the instruction and curriculum, pointing out that in one situation we say it like this, in another situation we say it like this, and then when you're with your friends and family it can sound very different. But just really identifying, pointing out those differences, again, that's being very explicit with your students. Focus and rigor. So instead of having a 15 or 18-week term that goes building a foundation that's very large and broad, it was focused and it went deep. So it was a curriculum that needed to have topic-specific vocabulary, but probably not much more than that. And it had to have certain language structures that they needed to learn, but not much more than that. It was really going deep with very specifically what they needed to get through the class so that they can transition on to the next class, be it an English-only class or another step in their ESL path. And then academic skills. It's really important, and the more I'm learning recently, especially being in Oregon, learning strategies are absolutely critical to the success of our students. You really have to pull out the strategies for students to grab onto. So an example might be when you're studying for the test that I'm going to give you, here's how I want you to study for it, or give them 3 different options, but definitely pulling out those strategies. How do they do it? They may not know, and it really shouldn't be on us to expect them to know. So that's where I'm going to leave off. So basically, what does a contextualized 21st century curriculum look like, and how did we go about creating one? At this point, I'm going to hand this over to our 2 panelists, Lisa and Leslie, who spent many, many hours designing the curriculum, developing curriculum, implementing it, monitoring it, evaluating it, reviewing it, and then redesigning it. And that's really the process they followed. And so I'm going to mute my microphone and then give Lisa and...
Can you hear me? Okay. This is Lisa. Leslie just said she got bumped off, so I'm going to rearrange the order a little bit until Leslie gets back on. So I'm going to skip to the second 2 points on Kelly's slide. So as Kelly mentioned, I was part of the pilot program, and I developed the curriculum for and taught the basic computer skills class. There were 2 levels, the basic skills and then a part 2, which was meant to be a bridge to the CTE class for office occupation. So Kelly has on her side collaborating with CTE, GED, and GED instructors. And this was really crucial to creating the curriculum. It was the first step. So I met with the teacher for office occupations and basically got her book and her syllabus so that I could see where my students were headed, where they needed to be, not only what computer skills they needed, but also what language skills they would need. And as Kelly mentioned, we had met over the summer for the Institute. I had a chance to meet with the teachers from other programs, which made this process of collaborating much easier and much more comfortable because we all kind of had met each other before and all kind of had the same goals in mind. And then as far as creating the customized ESL curriculum, basically after looking at the syllabus for the office occupations class, I created very specific goals for my students. Since we only had 9 weeks, as Kelly said, I needed to be very clear on what they were going to learn. And they received the whole curriculum at the beginning of the term, so they knew exactly what they were going to learn and how they were going to get there. So the process was using language or level appropriate English while they were learning the computer skills. So for example, and I would like to point out, Nancy asked a question on the chat if it was all in English, and it was all in English. It was a multi-level class. And so while some students maybe, if I was teaching word processing, how to use spell check, for example. A higher level student might be typing a business memo, where a lower level student might be typing the days of the week. So it really worked for all levels depending where they were. But in the end, they were all learning how to use the same computer skills, how to do spell check, for example, in that instance. And so this would help them once they got to the CTE eventually, which was the goal. Even if they didn't have all of the language skills necessary, they at least understood the computer concepts, so they could keep up with the class since they had the computer skills already, and the language would kind of follow. I wanted to point out also, as Lynn mentioned, that information is accessible to everyone. That was a big part of our class also, is using the internet to find information relevant to their jobs and to their lives, which is so important today. So they were able to find where is the nearest post office, what time is the library open, search for jobs, search for apartments. A lot of vocabulary that they would have been learning in a traditional ESL class, but now, oh, I'm sorry, I'll turn up my volume. Is that better? So as I was saying, they would learn vocabulary that they would learn in a traditional ESL class about jobs or the post office or the library, but now they were learning it on the computer and within the context of the computer skills. So if Leslie is back on, or if Kelly, you have any questions to add to that, that's basically how I created the curriculum.
Okay. Thank you so much. Sorry for previous ESP vessel curriculum, and then talk a little bit about integrating IT and Web 2.0 tools to facilitate learning, the first two bullets. So when we decided to do healthcare, we really wanted to open it up to students who were already working in some kind of capacity. Maybe they were working as a home health aide, maybe they were taking care of a parent, and also students who just had a slight interest in it. And the really nice thing about the healthcare module that we got, and we got it from, I believe, San Diego Community College. It was Donna Price Machado. I think I'm mispronouncing her name, but many of you are probably familiar with her. She put together a great workbook of modules. So when Kelly was talking earlier about identifiable outcomes, in each module, you will learn A, B, C, D, and E. And so what I tried to do is I tried to stick to that, but I tried to jazz it up a bit in that it was a workbook, kind of a black and white workbook with a lot of cartoon pictures. I tried to bring in the computer. I tried to bring in Flickr photos. I also tried to bring in more writing, just so it wasn't like we were going through page 35 to page 36 to page 37, which is something that could easily be done with a workbook like this. But in order to keep my students' interest, it was, I think, imperative to kind of jazz it up a bit and make it kind of exciting. So what I looked at is I looked at, to keep in line with ESL and where they came from, is I looked at some of the structures that they were learning there, and I tried to incorporate them more into the module. So for example, if a module had, Linda is a home healthcare aide, what does she do first? And they would have to write a sentence. If there were 5 questions like that, I would turn it into a paragraph, and then I would turn it into a peer editing exercise, and then I would turn it into they had to type it on the computer. So I tried to put many layers into it that they maybe were used to from previous ESL classes, and because we had orientation information, I knew a lot that we had to develop more writing. So I tried to put more structured writing into it. Lynn talked in the beginning about how soft skills and being flexible and independent are things that employers are looking for, and I found that this module really addressed those issues. So even if they weren't really drawn to healthcare, or maybe if they decided after the first 3 modules that this isn't for them, it was still a really great class in that they learned about what is what's the difference between being a resourceful employee and being a responsible employee? What do you do if you walk in and the person whose shift you just took over, she only finished 75% of the tasks? We kind of talked a lot through those problems, and that's where employable skills came in, even if they weren't sold on I want a healthcare career. So I'll kind of jump into integrating IT in Web 2.0. I would have students get laptops the first thing every single class for both the healthcare and the academic writing class. I'll talk a little bit about the academic writing class if that's okay. My class would start by free writing every single day on the computer, responding to pictures that I generated from the internet. When Oakland was going through a lot of budget talks, I had them kind of blog on we did a Moodle site, how they felt it was affecting them, how it would affect their future if Oakland indeed didn't continue the program. So I really tried to use a lot of computer skills to keep in line with what we were teaching, and also just to get them very interested and to expose them to, if you are going to go on to Laney, you need to be able to do your paragraph on a laptop. You need to be able to look at somebody else's work on a blog. So that was a little bit about what I did. And then and I'll close it off by saying that I really believe the structure and the expectation that you have to attend X amount of classes in order to get a certificate, in order to pass this module. I think setting those up from the very beginning kept what was a strong class. It made the class get stronger, and I can still see where the students sat in my class. They barely missed class at all, and I feel like they came away with what more rigor presented to them.
Great, thank you, Leslie. So I want to speak a little bit about the orientation, and I'll be brief about it. But initially, so one of the main things, there was a focus of the orientation, and then there was information that we shared with them. So some of the housekeeping items that we made very clear in the orientation was that there were expectations for the classes. You had to come on time, you had to complete your homework, and you had to complete all your coursework. You also had to come at least 80 hours. So if you missed a day, because this was a very fast-paced class and it was multi-level and they were beginning high and higher, they had to stay on top of their work. And we made that very clear. They had to set up email, and the main focus was on building cohorts. So the students were, I guess, critical friends or partners in their journey through this pilot project. So we assessed all domains. We assessed listening, speaking, reading, writing, and math. And we used the CASAS e-testing because it was easier for us to do. And then we used our in-house assessments. We had goal setting. That was a component in it, short-term to long-term goals. And then they met with a high school counselor, and that's where we used the ILPs that the work group in the summer had created to start documenting their path, like helping them to create a path. If here's your long-term goal and here are the short-term goals you need to accomplish to get there, here's the action steps that you need to take to achieve that goal. And so they met with the high school counselors, and some of them learned how they could transfer their high school from their country here. And, you know, so they had a lot of support in this orientation class, which took an entire week. And we also focused on study skills and learning strategies. So I feel that the orientation sort of set the tone for having a 21st century skill class. It really set the tone for these students and made it feel very different from anything that they've taken or any class they had taken with us before. So I want to go quickly so we have time for questions. I want to look at the outcomes of this pilot. We recruited a small group of 50 students. I mean, our idea was to start small and go big, but we recruited 50 students from within our program that met the criteria. And on the first day of orientation, 46 students showed up. Some were not admitted into class because they couldn't commit to the criteria that would enable them to be successful in the class. Some self-selected out for unknown reasons, and some weren't high enough in their listening, speaking, and writing skills to be successful in the classes. So, and then also some students showed up after the first day and they were asked to come back in 9 weeks. That we were really going to stick to having an attendance, some kind of attendance policy that put some accountability back onto the students. Yeah, and so at the end of the orientation, 26 students remained. So we had 26 students. And on my PowerPoint, I kind of made a little error where it says 26 students remained and earned certificates that specified the skills they acquired. That actually goes to the next bullet point. So at the end of the 9-week course, 25 students persisted through the entire pilot. And even though we started with 50 and we ended up with 25 or 26, we only lost one student through that whole 9-week and then extending on to 22 weeks in the end. So, so I think those were pretty good outcomes for us, considering it was our initial pilot and we were hoping to continue this pilot in the future. I'm just going to, I have a slide with student responses to the pilot because we did survey the students at the end of each 9-week session. And I'm just going to kind of skip through it. You can go back and read that on your own. But I do want to kind of summarize a few things that were really important to this pilot. So start small, go big. I think we all know that. Just start small, go big. The initial curriculum is just that. It's the initial curriculum. It's a living document and it needs to be massaged and it needs to continue to develop over time. And I really firmly believe that teacher selection was absolutely critical to the success of this pilot. Lisa and Leslie were two very motivated individuals who really put a lot of their energy and creativity into this pilot, which was actually very successful. And then I want to leave you with the idea in times like this, it doesn't hurt to dream big. So keep dreaming big. And that, so I want to leave that. Now I want to leave this. Are there any comments or questions that you have for me or Lynn or Lisa? Please type away, and I'll respond to your questions orally. So the download. So we have a couple of different things that a couple of different documents that we're leaving for you. And I actually have more if you want to email me. I'm happy to share since Oakland is currently on pause. I'm happy to share the work that we did. So please email me, but there are a list of different documents that we use.
All right, and as you type your questions, this is Sharice coming on again to say thank you to our presenters. I think they did a fantastic job. Lynn and Kelly really spent a lot of time preparing this presentation, and then having the expertise of Lisa and Leslie also helped add a great deal of depth to this presentation. The downloads are in the center chat pod, and as Barbara has been typing, if you highlight a file and you right-click on it to download and save to your computer, it will do just that. Right-click on it once you highlight it. And we do have a number of other webinars coming up for you to participate in. The next one will be on January the 25th at 2 p.m. also, and it will be on putting together professional learning communities from an administrator's perspective, the value, the use, and the implementation. And it will be done by Nancy George. And I hope that you will join us then. The registration for that is also on the CalPro calendar. And I see that there are some questions that have been typed up. We are out of time at this point, but you have the email addresses for both Lynn and Kelly so that you can further connect with them and further ask your questions. Again, I want to thank you all very much for your participation. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.